Okay, so here we have where we left off, which was you have these meetings that occur on there's a primary day, a meeting day where the caucus is held. So it might be, in a caucus state, they might be holding their caucuses on July 3rd. And on July 3rd, they get together, and each neighborhood, like we talked about just previously, Tybee, Wilmington Island, Pooler, Downtown, and Thunderbolt, they all have their own meetings. And the big distinction between the caucus meeting and an election is that at a meeting, people discuss. They hold a discussion. So they have to show up at 7:30 in the evening, sit through a discussion, and with their fellow party members. This is all party members, people who are declaring, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat. They discuss the candidates, and then at that meeting they cast their votes. In the meeting, there's one vote winner for Tybee, and then there's one vote winner for Wilmington Island. They put all these together, and that's the caucus winner for that city, and they go from the city to the state, and eventually the state calculates who won their caucus, who was the majority winner for all of the caucus meetings held around the state. So the big distinction here is it takes a lot of effort, for party members to show up to a meeting, hold a discussion, wait for a discussion, and then get a chance to vote. But your true diehard party members are taking part in this caucus. Other states hold what is called a primary election, which we can see is down here. A primary election is pretty simple. It's kind of what we would always assume this would be, is a secret ballot election where people go on election day usually from 7 to 7 in the morning till 7 at night, show up and in the privacy of their own ballot, cast their vote. And so the primary election's held on one day, maybe July 3rd, just like the other caucus state had their caucus meetings on July 3rd, but you can go at any time you want. And you show up, you don't have to talk to anybody, you're actually not allowed to discuss the campaign or any of that once you get to the primary election site, to the precinct site, and you vote, and then you leave, and you're done. There's two different types of primaries. You can see here. Let's highlight that. The first type of primary election is an open primary. An open primary election is an election where any registered voter in the state can participate, is what it says here. That means that you don't have to declare a political party to go vote in an open primary. So you're never forced to pick which party you're in. You just decide that year, hey, I want to participate in the Democratic primary election or the Republican primary election. If it's a year like the 2012 primary election year where Republicans were the ones with the competitive primary and Democrats really weren't because President Obama was running for re-election, you might, even if you were a Democrat, you might say, hey, I'm kind of interested to participate in the Republican primary. And that's allowed only in an open state, in an open primary state. You never have to choose which political party you are in. On the other hand, the other type is a closed primary, where when you register to vote, you actually register as a party member, and you have to declare registration and membership to that party, and then those are the only people who participate on that election day. Generally, primaries serve as elimination contests, which means, if they start in January, and a couple states have them in January, and then a couple more states have them in February, it's kind of who can build the most momentum for the primaries and the caucuses to try to win the most votes. So it's not about winning on one day during primary season. It's about winning over time. And then on the presidential election year, it's about winning and then eventually getting nominated to the presidency on the national convention. So at this point, you want to think about the difference between the primary process in a non-presidential election year as compared to the primary process in the presidential election year. This is a question you should be able to answer. There are some things that are similar, and there are some things that are different. Think about which process is generally a shorter process, which process is dragged out longer, presidential election or non-presidential election. These are all things you should be able to consider and know the answer to at this point. The next thing you should be able to do, and we're going to go ahead and add a page here, is you should be able to compare a caucus to a primary election. And you should be able to explain the difference between these two things. And so if you want to pause the video and give yourself a second to explain the differences between the primary and the caucus, that would be wise. For those of you that have, so you should have paused it, and now you're coming back on. I'm not going to take the time to wait on the video, but remember that a caucus meeting involves all party members. You have to be a party member to be in a caucus meeting. It involves a discussion and then a vote. It's held at one specific time, and there's various locations, which we'll call precincts, and we'll get into that. Now, the only thing that's similar between primaries and caucuses is this whole idea of the various locations. The primary election, which we'll clone this, put this over here. The primary election also has various locations. And so that's something else to consider. Here we have a similarity, but generally we need to identify in this chart what is different between the two. So let's go back up and think about what makes a primary election unique. And hopefully you guys already have this chart on your paper when you're taking notes from this, and you're just checking to see if you got this as you were watching the lecture. So a primary election can be open or closed. Which one's more similar to the caucus, open or closed? This is a question you should be able to answer at this point. A primary election is a secret ballot election, which means there is no discussion. It's private. And a primary election takes place throughout the day, meaning when polls are open, you can go vote. If polls aren't open, then no, you can't vote, but you don't have to show up for one specific meeting time. And again, the winner of the primary election for that state would win the nomination for that political party for that state. The people who get, the candidate that gets the most caucus votes or votes from the caucus members, they would then get the nomination from their state. And this just happens in state by state in various locations. And it takes months for us to move through this process for a national election. The presidential election is the only election where we need to calculate votes across the states. All other elections are just calculated statewide and then it's over. But the presidential election is kind of a different beast. So remember, at this point, you should be able to answer the question, the essential question from the very beginning of the presentation, which is right here. How do political parties nominate candidates for the general election? How does the nomination process happen? What is the difference between a caucus meeting and a primary election? How are they similar? How are they different? And that is what you should know walking into class tomorrow. Thanks, guys.